Welcome to the A-Dub Club, a podcast about sci-fi, fantasy, technology, pop culture, the internet, and general nerdery. There are three things that are important to know. One, we occasionally use swear words, but try to stay in the range of PG-13, or at least the kind of R that cool parents are fine with. Two, we may talk spoilers, though in this particular episode, we just discuss music we like, so be warned. And finally, three, most importantly, Miyeon from G-Idol was originally supposed to be the fifth member of Blackpink, but ended up not debuting with them for reasons that are unknown to this day. But it's okay, because she's great in G-Idol. With that out of the way, welcome to the Clubhouse. We have snacks. Welcome to the A-Dub Club. I'm Andrew Whipple.
I'm Alex Wade.
And COVID got a lot worse in the 6 weeks since we recorded our last episode. I listened to the episode, and I guess I also edited the episode. I don't think there's anything in there that we said that was wildly nothing that was irresponsible at the time, and I don't think anything that was irresponsible at the time we released it. But some of our stuff was a little closer to the edge now than it would have been back then. So
yeah, I certainly would not now go and visit New York for a week at this current moment. So yeah.
Yeah, probably not. Alex Wade. It turns out Alex Wade was the cause of this surge.
You got it.
Yep. Him alone. Because, like we said, that was the big thing to take away from the last episode, is that everything about COVID is about individual responsibility and your individual choices, and that's the only thing that matters. But to distract us from our COVID hellscape for a moment here, we're going to talk about something else that we've done. I think we've done like one or two episodes that kind of skirt around it, but
Really?
wanted to sort of dive into a little bit more and talk more about music by asking, what is good music?
Bare Naked Ladies. End of episode.
It's true. It's been 1 week since you looked at me. I don't remember the rest of the words,
I said I'm sorry. Looked at me. Angry.
Chicken of China, the Chinese chicken. That's music in a nutshell. What is good music?
I'll start a little bit with our mutual friend Killian, also affectionately known as Cuddle Bear from my freshman year of high school.
I forgot about that.
I did too, till right this moment. I went on a hike with him and I asked him this question, and I don't remember most of his answer, but I remember bits and pieces of it. He said for him personally, one big factor was rhythm, and how like he needs music that has a good rhythm to it that he can kind of jive with in that sense. Then he kind of broadened out his answer a little bit more to like talking about a lot of like cultural influences and like how where you grow up and what is surrounding you, heavily influences your own opinions and your own thoughts around good music. And then the final point of his that I remembered was there are some people who prefer variety, like they need, that certain amount of variety in their musical repertoire, which is something that I personally really identified with. And I had talked to him about this. And my two favorite days of the week for music are Monday and Friday, because those on Spotify are the Discover Weekly playlist and then the Release Radar, which are always going to be, well, not always, but majority of the time are going to be new music for me, especially in the Release Radar. But Discovery Weekly usually is new music for me as well. And that's definitely something that I identify with in his answer as well.
Nice. Okay. Rhythm, whatever jives with your culture, and variety.
And there was more, but I forgot it, or I was hiking behind him and didn't hear it. We talked about a lot of things.
Nice. Yeah, I meta take on all of this, which is the quick and dirty cop-out answer to any sort of like what makes good, blah, whatever, regardless of what art that you're talking about, is that like, I don't know, it depends, like universal objectiveness is bullshit and blah, blah, whatever. So meta take on Killian's answer is that like the way you even started out rephrasing his answer is like, this is what is good to me, or this is what I consider good, or how I interpret the way, this is me putting words into Killian's mouth, but this is how I interpret the way the world considers, or the way our culture considers things that are good, I think are valuable meta thoughts to go behind any sort of conversation that we have, especially as two white guys in their 20s. But I'm
sorry, I think opinions matter besides white guys in their 20s?
I can't even say make the certainly not joke. I can't even do
Okay.
it. I can't even do it. Not until Trump's officially out of office. Not until January 20 when he's dragged out kicking and screaming.
You're here.
But anyway, the I think so. That's the cheapo answer. That like, who knows? Ever depends. Blah blah. I think we can sort of put, oh hey, the whole qualifying statements thing from that we gave up on
Oh yeah.
2 years ago. But you can sort of take anything else we're going to say throughout the rest of this episode, you can probably append, in my opinion, or the way I see it, or in American youth culture, or blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. Like there's qualifiers to everything because I think, yeah, it's very subjective. That said, yeah, those are some interesting things. I think the variety one is interesting to me because that to me seems like a thing that very strongly differs from person to person, more so than, or not more so, but like, especially out of those three things, it's, are you someone who primarily has a genre, has a style, has a
Yeah.
set of artists, for instance, that you really gravitate towards, or are you someone who primarily enjoys the fact that things are different, and that whenever you do start to
Yeah.
enjoy a thing, the thing that will make you more of that same is diminished because it's missing the variety that you would get from something outside of that genre, style,
Interesting. So for
artistic wheelhouse.
I would say for me personally, because I really jived or vibed with that sentiment of variety, was like music that is similar to the music that I like, but is
Okay.
new.
Okay.
So
So,
like for example, also like I apply this to a lot of things in my life, like sugar. I'm huge into drinking soda and eating candy. I have a huge sweet tooth. Like I have sodas and candies that I love and adore, but I also really like trying new candies. So like the concept in this case, this would be the concept of sugar as the genre of music for me.
there has never been a more Alex Wade metaphor to use to be talking about, like, how do you feel about what qualifies good music by saying, well, let me tell you about the kinds of sodas and candies that I like.
Yes. That's why Halloween was amazing, not only because it was a lot of candy, but also because it was a literal random grab bag of strange candies that could be different.
Okay. So that's interesting, though. To the fact that that's the most incredible metaphor I've ever heard aside, I agree with that. I think that is much more the way that I'm at. So I was sort of thinking, as I sort of, my gut reactions thinking about the variety thing is that for me, I feel like and have had people tell me, actually Killian himself, I think in high school, if I'm remembering correctly, tell
Yeah.
me that like my music taste seems eclectic or seems weird or seems too all over the place. But what I've sort of started to, what I historically would always draw it out is saying that, like, okay, for me, yes, my music taste is eclectic, but it's eclectic in three distinct camps of
Sure.
I like poppy music, I like folky music, I like punky music. That's kind of the universe of stuff that I like. And then I'll listen to a lot of things outside of that. And I even like, there's plenty of country stuff that I like. There's plenty of hip hop stuff that I like.
Yeah.
I listen to Broadway musicals, etc. But most of my favorites are somewhere along those poles. Even within that, though, I was starting to realize this week as I was kind of thinking about, like, who are the artists that I really like? Where do they fit on some of these things? It's kind of almost like those are 3 points of a triangle, and everything I like is somewhere in between that, of like, I
Interesting.
really love pop punk music. And what is pop punk music but the halfway point between pop and punk?
Sure, yeah.
I really love like sort of Bruce Springsteen-y stuff, and like, well, Bruce Springsteen is very punk influenced, but he also writes very poppy and fun songs, but they're also kind of folksy stuff.
Sure.
Or Phoebe Bridgers and that same sort of thing. And so I'm kind of wondering if it's like, even before, I wouldn't have necessarily said my stuff was varied. It was that I have my genres, and exactly like you said, I like new things, but new things within the predefined genres. It's just that those three genres are seemingly distinct and weird. The more I think about it, though, this week, it's like, actually, even those three genres are kind of just all spectrums of each other. And it's like this one pop, punk, folk thing is like, that is my music taste, with occasional hip hop here and there, occasional country here and there, occasional Broadway here and there.
I definitely identify with that. And like for me, some of my favorite songs are in those mixes of things. Like for me,
Okay.
my accesses I'd say are EDM, pop, maybe some like I guess alt rock kind of thing. I don't know, hard to describe.
Mhm.
Definitely hip
Mhm.
hop is in there, but like not not classic hip hop, more modern hip hop.
Sure.
Um, but like some of my favorite songs are the ones that blend two genres very well. And like one of my favorite songs is there's a song by KDA that's it's actually KDA's first song. So KDA is the Korean pop band that comes from League of Legends.
Alex Wade, you know who it is coming around again. You want a dose of this? Right now it's KDA.
that's I mean, that's one of my favorite songs. Like right now, of like I really vibe with that song. I feel like that's a song that's between like pop and EDM to some extent.
Yeah.
And like really vibe with that. Really vibe with Billie Eilish, and she's definitely very pop, but is also in this like I don't know. Maybe she's
Ooh.
what would you qualify Billie Eilish as?
Yeah, Billie Eilish, I mean, so she strikes me as the less rappy version of SoundCloud rap is kind of where I put her. I see her in a very similar spot as like Lil Uzi Vert, Lil Peep, stuff like that.
Sure.
Just even more so on the pop side than if those are like taking hip hop and then aggressively applying a lot of pop and emo to it. Billie Eilish is sort of the pop, the emo, and then sort of weird alt stuff with definitely a lot of hip hop influences, but it's less sort of explicitly in the text of the music the way it is for like Lil Uzi Vert.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, but what I was going to say is that is actually interesting. Because I also love KDA. I think it was on your suggestion that I listened to them
Sure.
last
Probably.
year. That said, I don't really like their newest single, but whatever.
Well, they came out with an album recently.
Oh, they come up
They're
with a whole album. Okay,
I think so. Yeah.
I just heard the more. I guess is what it's called. The
Yeah,
song.
I
I was
agree
like,
with
it's fine.
yeah. They did come out with an album that does have more as like their single off of it, but yeah.
Okay. Okay. I will have to listen to that then. And they got me into G Idol, which is great. Which then got me into watching. Yuki has a YouTube reality show that she is hosting right
Hmm,
now, which is very fun because she's my favorite part of G Idol, but doesn't get a lot to do in their actual songs because I think it's because her voice is too low and she's not as good of a singer as everyone else, but she's a very
sure.
funny TV host. Anyway, what I was going to say is that is an interesting framing of you sort of saying that like the pop stars is sort of a in your head it sort of fits between these multiple different poles of it's like part pop, part EDM, and I totally agree with that. In my head that all collapses down to pop because for me I have it framed as like, well, it's yeah, that's just like pure pop stuff even though it has these EDM influences because I don't
Sure.
consider EDM as its own. I do consider it as an own distinct genre, but it's not a like foundational pulling, like gravitational well of
Gotcha.
music
Yeah.
for me. And so for me, I'm like, well, where does KDA fit between pop and punk? Very
Sure.
clearly, fully pop. But you could totally make the argument if instead what you are interested in is like hip hop versus EDM versus pop, that they are much like further afield of pure, like a Carly Rae Jepsen pure pop kind of thing,
Yeah.
and more towards the EDM side of the world, which is interesting and exciting. How the same thing can be different blends of genres
Yeah.
depending on what genres you focus on and care about.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's yeah. I'm trying to bring this back to how this it comes around to like good music. I guess
Yeah,
it's just more like what makes I guess like not tricks our brain, but like tickles that button of like why variety does that. Well, I guess
yeah.
yeah. Why does variety do that? Like
It's interesting because I mean, I think this is where it would be useful to talk to someone who is either so if you and I are both in that like we have our lanes that we like to play in but we want new stuff within that,
yeah,
or we want stuff that plays with the boundaries of those established types of music and genres that we like. It would be very interesting to talk to someone who is I know that they exist because I think these people just have different relationships to music than we do. People who are much further on the truly omnivorous, they listen to everything
yeah,
and love everything and really are like, as soon as they hear someone who's at all derivative of anyone else, they bounce and go to the next thing, which is much further afield than we are, or the opposite. And probably these people, by and large, don't consider themselves huge music fans. That's me projecting. I don't know. But they're people who are even more like, yes, I have my three artists that I really like. I listen to them a lot. it takes effort to push them into listening to even of newer versions of things that are in that same
Yeah.
genre, which I've definitely interacted with people like that. I definitely have some family members who are sort of like that, and it's hard. I think it'll be hard for us to have an understanding of why does our style work for us and those
Yeah.
other styles not, because it's sort of like, well, we like what we like.
It's something that's interesting that because my dad, for example, he is 57. Yeah, 57, and he loves new music. He all the time is listening to pop stuff, and working out he listens to a lot of EDM stuff, and like loves discovering. Not I don't know if he like keeps a catalog of his music, but I think he just has like Pandora and he just like lets it do its thing. But that's something that even like in like part of me was like concerned, not concerned, but like theorizing that maybe this is like due to our youth, that we're still trying
Yeah.
to kind of explore and settle down possibly with our own opinions. But then like there's my dad, who is like a very, not I wouldn't say a very traditional person, but like if people would be surprised if he told you that he liked EDM.
Yeah, yeah, that is surprising to me because my in my family, I definitely have examples of people who do. My mom and dad, as well as my grandpa, I'd say, are all people who do actively seek out and enjoy new music. That said, they tend to do it more in, I mean, same kind of lens of what we're talking about. Of
Yeah.
like, my grandpa really loves country music, and so he will listen to all the great new country stuff, but he may not necessarily go super far afield outside of that. My parents, my dad especially, like they both love classic rock music. They love hip hop. They love sort of 90s to early 2000s alternative stuff. And so they'll listen to more stuff that fits within that mold, but may not necessarily go super far. Like, I don't know. Are my parents going to get into a ton of K-pop stuff? I mean, maybe when I go home for the holidays and make us play it in the car all the time. We shall see. But my guess is probably not. There's a quote that I heard years ago that might just be pop pseudoscience bullshit. Who knows? But it's something along the lines of that, like the music that you love when you're in high school is the music you're going to love for the rest of your life, or like whoever your favorite band is in high school, you'll still love them forever.
Sure.
And I don't know. I feel like there is some truth to that. I definitely do still feel very attached to a lot of the groups that I liked in high school. But I don't. We'll see. I guess we'll see what it's like in 10, 20 years of like,
Yeah.
am I continuing to like things of that style, or do I progress in the way that like EDM wasn't a thing when your dad was in high school? So that is
Sure.
a
Yeah.
genuinely new genre that he is into.
I think that first off, we're 26, and like you're 26, right?
Yes.
27? You're not 27? You're 26. Yeah, yeah.
26. 26.
We're 26, and like we're still discovering new music and
Yeah.
like still enjoying new things. So that whole sentiment of like what you liked in high school, but I there is some credence to that in the same way how I felt, or how I guess I feel now about Howl's Moving Castle, like our last
Oh, yeah.
episode of I may not necessarily think that Bowling for Soup is the greatest band in the world anymore, but like, oh, 1985, I'll always sing along to that, and I'll always get that nostalgia bump when I listen to it. Or if it's, I mean, I probably won't ever listen to it of my own volition, through Spotify, but like if it's playing at somewhere or something, like, oh yeah, I'll love it and I'll have a great time and it'll be great. But I do comprehend and understand that it's not like necessarily gonna be, it's not gonna be in my life commonly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want
Yeah.
to say necessarily that it's not good, but it's not gonna be in my repertoire.
Yeah. I feel that. It is interesting. I don't know fully where I stand on thinking about like music of middle and high school. I definitely it feels like there's been a drastic shift that started particularly like sophomore year of college, of me getting aggressively into pop music, starting with like Taylor Swift, Carly Rae Jepsen in college, and then I kind of take like the other big new genre that I've gotten into in the last couple of years or since college is K-pop, but
Yeah.
arguably that's just like, oh, I got really into pop music. What is the next most aggressive kind of pop that you can do? And it's like, okay, let's do K-pop.
Yeah.
Like pop squared kind of stuff. But and part of this, I think, maybe through the post hoc rationalization of everything being this like pop folk funk trio thing. But if you were to talk about me in high school and especially in middle school, it would seem like I'm not super into pop music.
No.
I probably would have said something to that effect.
I frankly thought of you in terms of your music taste as like super pretentious, like not even alt rock, just like classic rock
100%.
person who was snobby about their music. Like I don't think we
100%.
talked about music, but that was just
Yes. Oh, 100%. That is how I self-conceived as well. But now that I'm looking back and starting to think about it, even within that frame, the stuff that I really liked, I was had a huge soft spot for power pop music. So like Fountains of Wayne, Not a Surf, bands like that are like, if you're going to be a super pretentious classic rock bro, you're not going to be super obsessed with the band who did Stacy's Mom.
yeah.
Unless you have this draw towards pop somewhere in there. Same thing, I think, earlier in middle school, and then I stopped at like end of middle school, beginning of high school, but got back into it at the end of high school of like pop punk music, especially like the glossiest, like All American Rejects, Green Day, All Time Low, like the
Yeah.
glossiest pop punk stuff was the stuff that I gravitated towards. And then the other thing, which I like totally had blacked out and breaks with my entire conception of myself as a bratty classic rock. I would never listen to rap and country or pop music person. Is that the first ever album that I bought on iTunes was the first Taylor Swift album, and I really liked. Like my parents were reminding me, it's like, oh yeah, of course you're like Taylor Swift's your favorite artist. Like you loved her in end of middle school and beginning of high school, and I had like completely blacked that out as a
Wow.
thing. So I think that's the complicating factor for me of it feels like, and in terms of my actual listening process, that like there was a big shift between middle school and college of like starting to love pop. Clearly, however, the seeds were there of like there was a pop fan inside of me just waiting to like have the freedom to take root and actually like lean into it rather than like have it be
Definitely like
the
the inception of my music tastes started in when did it start? I want to say like 7th or 8th grade. Like before that, the only music that I listened to was like there was 2 or 3 CDs my parents ever played in the car of either Sting or who sings Landslide?
Fleetwood Mac.
Fleetwood Mac and the landslide roll down. That's Fleetwood Mac.
Well, they have a song called Landslide. I actually don't know the song off the top of my head.
Right up above, and I see my reflection in the snow covered. No, that song. Whatever.
It rings no bells, but I'm going to look up the lyrics, and yes, that is Fleetwood Mac's Landslide.
Okay, yeah, I guess it was Fleetwood Mac then. Really? Wow. That baffles me because I had no idea that was Fleetwood Mac, and like
Fleetwood Mac, they are one of those, like not to interrupt your story too much, but I have pretty aggressively turned away from classic rock as well in the intervening years, much to the consternation of my dad and brother who both love classic rock, and my dad who now plays in a dad rock band, and then is frequently asking like, "Hey, do you want to play with us sometimes?" And I'm like, "I would, but I just don't want to play any of those songs." However, Fleetwood Mac is the one that I'm like, I should get into them because I think I would like them a lot, but I just haven't.
okay.
Anyway, two CDs, Fleetwood Mac and Sting.
2 CDs and Sting and the Police. Like that was the only music we listened to. If we didn't listen to that music, first off, we never listened to the radio. We would always be listening to conservative talk radio, so I couldn't get music from there either. And I just didn't care. I just didn't think music would be that big a deal, you know? And then in like 7th or 8th grade, Nat had burned me a CD of like 70 to 80 songs. And that CD was like my holy grail of music that I had for a long period of time. It was like a lot of alt rock stuff, a lot of I don't know sad some sad emo music kind of things and stuff like that. But a lot of alt rock was like my I guess music style preference completely based off of Nat, and I started to have kind of the snobby sensibility about pop music and like, oh, I would never like pop music. And then that didn't come around for me till like college when I realized like that doesn't fucking matter. Like don't don't be pretentious.
100%. One, I am very familiar with the music that would have been on that CD because freshman year of high school during one of our like free periods in the refectory, Nat gave me a thumb drive that had like his entire iTunes library on it with a couple hundred songs or something like that on it.
Oh,
And so I then similarly like that went onto my iPod, and like I listened to that all through high school as well. So I think a lot of those, I'm assuming it's a lot of the same stuff of your,
probably. Yeah.
God, what songs would have been on a bunch of stuff, lots from the Scrubs soundtrack that I
Oh yeah,
remember,
absolutely.
that I remember
So yeah, so
very
actually I
clearly.
got that CD for I guess a year or two, and then I did also get his iTunes library as well. That
Got
was
it. Yep.
also what I
Yep.
got. Yeah.
Shouts Nat for
Yeah.
educating the youth of
Thanks,
tomorrow.
man.
And by
You had
youth
a
of
good
tomorrow I mean everyone, like two friends in your same grade.
yeah.
It was good shit though. But
Definitely enjoyed it. Yeah.
yeah, 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 it is interesting to think of like what are those moments that create music taste, because I so to eventually rope all the way back to the idea of like what makes good music or not,
Yeah.
the like a huge part of it is personal preference within particular aesthetics, and to some degree those aesthetics I think are going to be shaped by whatever's the stuff that you like, but also what do you get exposed to, and of the stuff you get exposed to, what do you gravitate towards. I guess like with everything, it's sort of nature versus nurture of, do like, would I have loved power pop music as much if it wasn't something that my parents played around the house all the time?
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah. It's weird to think that just by like the roll of dice of Nat having iTunes and also not Nat having iTunes, like I that was actually I believe gotten from his sister.
Oh,
Like
wow.
that was his. Yeah.
This is a total side note, but that I am, I think my sister is too old to be a test case that I'm interested in, but I do really want to know, how does music discovery happen now? Is it all coming through algorithms, or
Ah,
is it all coming through combos of algorithms and TikTok? Is there still the thing of like, in my case, it wouldn't, I was the older sibling, but like it is a time honored tradition of the older sibling likes whatever is in high school, and they like whatever seems like cool music, and then they
yeah,
pass it down to the younger siblings,
for sure.
and then like the people who have older siblings then pass it over to their friends through whatever the medium is. And I wonder if, is that still happening now just through Spotify playlists of like, here's a bunch of cool stuff that I listen to, I'm going to put it on at the party, do you like it now, let's send it over, great?
Yeah,
Or is that purely localized? Actually, to your point about the Discover Weekly and the release radar of like, that is, you're getting the experience of new music, but it is new music that is tailored for you, rather than here's a bunch of new music that everyone's going to go and listen to.
yeah. That's actually something that's I've found is really interesting. Is I've seen definitely some markets out there or some businesses of talking about how it's not like we don't use an algorithm, we use real people, and like
Yeah,
there are businesses that have curators that are manned by real people, and it's so fascinating that like that's what they're selling now is like, oh, it's not some computer that's trying to shovel you something, it's actual people that you need to evaluate
mm,
on this kind of ineffable, whatever ineffable quality that humans have that algorithms can't, reproduce is the theory behind it.
yeah,
And I'm curious, like I personally don't follow like specific music curators or I don't know taste makers in this way. Like I can't. I'm trying to think of like what other things in my life are determined by algorithms that I
mm,
do have like intentional people who I like look at, like news,
yeah,
for example. I guess like I do look at Reddit sometimes for news and stuff, but I also very specifically have like, oh, I really trust Nate Silver. I really trust Hassan Abi, who I watched on election night.
yeah,
Those human people versus like whatever algorithm gives news or cable news, frankly.
yeah. That's interesting. I'm trying to think like, where does my new music discovery come from? I used to be big on the Spotify Discover Weekly a lot, like 2-3 years ago, and I haven't listened to it in probably a couple of years. But it does. I do still get a lot of either things are on a similar playlist of stuff like that, or I see it popping up often on like other artists that if you like this, you will also do it. That's a big part of how I sort of am spider webbing out into more and more K-pop stuff. But I guess like YouTube is a big one for me. Of I see YouTube recommendations either on the homepage or on like the suggested similar things when you're watching a video. Much more for me in terms of how I discover new music. That also being said, I think I discover a lot less new music now than I did even a couple of years ago.
I mean, yeah, me too. Like I used to for new music. For me now, it's almost totally through Spotify algorithms. I used to follow some specific channels. Like there was Proximity was a good YouTube channel for new EDM music. That is where they had a new song every single day from some different artist. Like that's where I discovered a lot of my new EDM music from.
Yeah, because I guess for me it's I feel like I'm discovering a lot less music, both because my music consumption has changed, and particularly I'm going to just keep talking about it this entire episode. The more I get into K-pop, actually, yours and mine's approach to, from what I've heard, your approach to K-pop versus my approach to K-pop, I think is sort of indicative of like some differences in our listening styles. Where like you have suggested many times, and like, oh, there's the K-pop dieback playlist or other things like that will let you
I
like
was about to mention that.
learn, listen to top songs from a ton of different artists. My approach is always like I get aggressively into a specific artist and listen to them almost nonstop.
Sure.
And then find another song of another artist and then start to aggressively listen to them, and maybe aggressively listen to now those two. And then it balloons into 3 artists that I aggressively obsess over, much less so than like I'm torn on whether to consider myself a big K-pop fan, because it is most of what I listen to on a day-to-day basis. But it is Blackpink, Red Velvet, ITZY, G-Idol, and starting to get into BTS and Twice. But like for most of this year, basically there were like 3 groups that I listened to, like for 12 hours a day or whatever.
If there's someone who I really really like, so like I had listened to King Princess for like one song of hers that I really really loved, and so I was like, okay, I need to go and listen to more of her stuff. And like I also have I have a running Spotify. Well, my liked songs in Spotify are like my master list of songs that has been made for the past like 4 years or so. And it's like those artists, if they get into this list, I probably will go and listen to more of their specific stuff,
Yeah.
Anyway, we're just talking a lot about us.
We are, which is good. What makes good music? What is good music? So we have done a very exciting and interesting deep dive into 1/3 of Killian's framing of what makes good music. How about the rhythm one is interesting also to me. Alex Wade, if you look at the kind of stuff that you listen to, are there particular elements of music composition or music craft that you gravitate to more or less than other ones?
Absolutely. So I've been home for several months now, and in all of the cars I have fiddled with the controls or whatever and turned up the bass to the maximum volume.
Okay.
Because that is absolutely like I want to feel it in my bones, and like there's one song like I feel like for me one of the best songs I really like is by 2 Feet. Best songs I really like sounds super vague, but like I really really vibe to the song. It's called "Go Fuck Yourself," and it's just got this like very heavy, dirty bass beat to it with fantastic drops, and it's very slow and methodical. And I don't know how to like phrase this, but there's a playlist out there that's called I'm not subscribed to it. I probably should, but it's called Songs to Face Fuck or Get Face Fucked to.
Okay.
And
all right.
Possibly consider
evocative.
Possibly
evocative
consider
titling.
This from.
Well, I mean, if you want to, we certainly can. But no, I very strongly like. There is something so weird to say this in context. Something so satisfying about a like evocative description, like when you're listening to like any sort of artistic criticism, and particularly of music, where like someone has captured a turn of phrase that succinctly like gives you exactly what the vibe is of a thing,
Yeah.
it's magical. So I can while I yeah I
The vibe of
it's
that album,
definitely
yeah, like
it's a crude description, but an evocative
sure.
description. I will say.
It is a yes, it is very choice. But that like bass for me is huge, and just kind of getting this vibe of like, I don't know, I want it to be something that I can feel, you know,
Yeah.
on like on a deep level within my bones. There's that part of it. There was I know there was something that someone was talking about. Not someone. I don't know where I heard this from, but the sense of like good music is kind of a dance of like
Hmm.
it's your brain tricking yourself and to think that it can predict the next movement or change in the song, but while at the same time not being too obvious.
Okay.
So it's this kind of feedback loop you have with yourself of like, oh, your brain like being like, yes, I got it right, and also like being on its toes in order to like think about and feel what the next part is going to be, which I thought was a very interesting thing that like I
Yeah.
jived with that definition a lot.
Yeah, I think I agree, and it definitely ties into like a known brain chemistry thing about pop music specifically is that like pop music is incredibly repetitive, and that's the goal and the point. That at least
Yeah,
painting with the broad brush over generalization, but like more repetitive stuff is stuff that you will enjoy and remember more. Again, in the like fat part of the bell curve, and so that's why in pop music you do see a lot of like one note melodies, and you see a lot of like shorter chorus, especially as music, or the theory is this is as things are getting away from radio and album oriented stuff and more towards like internet streaming,
yeah,
and everything on demand. You're seeing shifts towards songs that are more repetitive, and also things that are like shorter choruses that repeat, or a lot of segments that start to repeat, where it's like you have your chorus that repeats, but your pre-chorus also repeats, as does your like half of your verse and stuff like that. That adds in an interesting wrinkle that I think is not captured in those discussions around how like, oh, pop music is getting so much more repetitive. That wrinkle of you want things to be repetitive, you want things to be predictable, but you don't want it to be so predictable that it's boring, is
yeah,
a fine line of craft that
yeah,
you can tell. Yeah, you can feel when a song is for you hits it just right versus a song that's too all over the place versus a song that's incredibly boring and you
yeah.
get halfway through and you're like, I don't care about this anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, so
Nice.
I think that's kind of the gist of it for me.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one thing that I was thinking about on my side. Again, just take a shot talking about K-pop. I in realizing I was noticing this when I was listening to the new Taylor Swift album. So also take a shot because I'm talking about Taylor Swift too. That it would take me a couple listens through the song to sort of grok what the actual lyrics were, and so I had thought of myself as being a more lyric forward music fan, but clearly that was not the case anymore, in that I could listen to a song, decide whether I like it or not, and then, you know, not know what the actual lyrics were. So I'm not
Yeah.
like, clearly I'm not taking lyrical content out of it. However, what I do really strongly gravitate towards is like, even if I'm not listening to the lyrics, the sounds of the words and like the sibilance and the poetry, and like literally like there are songs that I will stop listening to or not like because I don't like the way that word choice sounds
Sure.
in
Yeah.
that line and stuff like that. And that's something that really stands out to me. And what I was trying to wonder is like, I feel like I've always considered myself a lyrics fan. How much of that was me just like post hoc justifying it? So after
Sure.
I've listened to a song a bunch, then I start to notice the lyrics and I really like it, or how much of that was me confusing the content of the lyrics from the literal vocal sounds of the lyrics, and really what I was gravitating towards was the vocal sounds. And I'm not totally sure where I was historically on it. And the reason why I was kind of thinking about it in that way is like, is this something? Is the fact that I'm willing to ignore lyrics but really heavily focus on sound of words, is that something that was always true of me, and therefore it's why I can like K-pop so much when I don't
Yeah.
understand any of the lyrics, and I don't even care to look up, like I never look up the lyrics
Sure.
in
Yeah.
translations, because like who gives a shit? Or is that something that changed because I spent the better part of the last 2 years spending like 80% of my listening is to K-pop?
Was it the cause or was it the result?
Yeah, exactly.
That was also something that Killian had said. Was he briefly mentioned the lyrics and being like, yeah, they can be important, but sometimes they're not. It's situational, which I also very much agree with. Like it's
yeah.
some songs, yes, lyrics. I love the lyrics and I love the specific like phrases they use and what the sentiment of the song is and what they're saying. Some other songs, I do not care.
Yeah, and I do think it's a thing that like it is I view it as a part of craft that is yeah, it's not a primary thing, but it is a thing that exists, and it will put like a song that has beautiful, heartbreaking poetry to it and incredible turns of phrase will I will like that more than a song that doesn't have that a lot of the time. But it's not the thing that I'm being fully gravitated towards, and it's not even something that like the new BTS song Dynamite is like one of the dumbest songs I've ever heard in my entire life. The lyrics literally make no sense, but it's still fun. I still like it.
Sure.
I do find myself almost wishing it was still in Korean, so at least then I could ignore it. Versus I'm like hearing turns of phrase and I'm like, no, people don't say that. But whatever. It still slaps.
Yeah.
Another thing though that I was noticing for me in a similar way that different from I think your like sort of base focus it wants to move you, but a same sort of style of ways of interacting with music is that I think I was noticing this in of course I do this. I make every year a list of my top 10 favorite albums. And in 2015 I was doing that list and that was the year that Carly Rae Jepsen's Emotion, Grimes' Art Angels, and Kendrick's To Pimp a Butterfly all came out. And I was noticing with all three of those that I love them all. They're great masterpieces, incredibly, incredibly good albums. They also, to me, had this feeling, especially in comparison to some of the other albums that I liked but didn't love. They kind of felt like you were listening to the inside of a person's head. Like they were
Yeah.
chaotic, but chaotic in a really evocative and controlled way. They felt really like tuned towards particular expressions, even if those expressions could sometimes be off-putting. In the case of Grimes and Kendrick, it was much more sort of like big, bold, chaotic, pulling in 1,000 different directions. In the case of Carly, it was more focused, but still focused on like giant crush emotions and things like that. And I think that's a thing that for me, there's lots of music that I like, but if it's well executed and also gives you that vibe of you're feeling like you're peering inside of the head of the artist or a character that the artist is creating, and it sort of sounds like that chaos that happens inside of a person's brain, I really fucking love that.
I agree with that. I also think that there's different moods for that. Like, of course, there's different moods for different kinds of music, of course. But I do want to say, in terms of this specifically, of like, it feels like what you're saying is that some of these albums felt more intense and more like, I don't want to say more like high art, but like, like less something you would put on in the background while you're working, and more like you might consider listening just to that for a while.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
might consider sitting down and listening to an album.
Totally.
I know Carly Rae Jepsen's was it her most recent album? Like I played that shit on repeat.
Yeah.
And like the first time there were some times when I would just be like sitting listening to it or something, or I'd be listening to the whole album while I'm traveling. So it's like I'm not doing anything else. I'm just listening to this album, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And there is definitely a difference between wanting to listen to an album on its own versus like listening to music in the background, you know.
Yeah, I that's a good point.
Yeah, something else I'd want to talk about was I guess the comparison of like favorite versus good, kind of again in the context of the our last episode, maybe 2 episodes ago, of like Howl's Moving Castle, of like that movie is still probably one of my favorite Miyazaki films, but I understand after our conversation that like it may not necessarily be the best, you know. And in that similar way, how a lot of music of like, I feel like music, especially considering that it's so easily consumed, and like you can listen to bad music and it doesn't affect anyone. I mean, you can watch bad things, it doesn't affect anyone either. But like, there's something that feels unique about music that listening to bad music because it's your favorite is acceptable. You know, I feel like it's
Yeah.
more culturally accepted to do that.
Yeah, I think the favorite versus best thing is super interesting. I definitely think about things as favorite versus best all the time. And in fact, I was realizing my dad is the one who sort of instilled that concept in me. I think through the lens of being like, don't be a dick about other people's favorite stuff, even if it's different than your own. Which I will say, even when I was snobby, I do like to think that I still was willing to be like, I don't like that, but it's okay that you do. But if I wasn't,
Sure.
don't correct me. I would rather live in this blissful ignorance that I was very welcoming and open to everyone else's tastes. But it was actually in the context of music that my dad was talking about this. I don't remember the exact conversation, but it's probably something along like, my dad's favorite artist is Bruce Springsteen, but he thinks the best are the Beatles or something like that.
Yeah.
Even in talking about, or when I think of examples of that, of like so and so is the best, but so and so is my favorite, I think the things that take precedence when I'm thinking about my favorites are the reactions that they create in me of like, positive, negative, what have you. Those I think start to take more precedence over other aspects, like the craft of it. Is it well executed? Does it have an idea that it expresses well? Those start to take more precedence when I'm thinking about stuff being the best. In a way that I'm willing to forgive. I can be like, that is technically bad, but I like it a lot. Therefore, it's my favorite. I also wonder if some of it is that, like, when I'm thinking about favorite versus best, it's also a nod to what are the things that are sort of more commonly accepted, where everyone, like, if something is the majority of people's favorites, that kind of leans more towards potentially calling it the best than if it's something that, like, is more divisive or more liked by a smaller minority of people.
Yeah, I think a lot of people conflate the two of like pop. Well, that's the difference between popular and best. Um,
Mm-hmm.
which I
Oh,
mean,
interesting.
I think best, quote unquote, is it is still subjective, obviously.
Yeah.
But it is people often substitute popular for best.
Yeah.
So like, yeah,
Yeah, I think that makes
I think
sense. Yeah, you sort of see it in two directions, where it's that people are assuming the thing that is the most popular is the best, or they're assuming the thing that they think is the favorite is also the best,
yeah,
or they're taking as a knock if someone is arguing that putting a credit. Actually, again, K-pop and Taylor Swift, good examples of
yeah,
fandoms who do not necessarily understand the distinction between favorite and best all of the time.
yeah,
Where you can post, like the New York Times posted a positive review of Folklore, but a positive review of Folklore that was through the lens of like, there are some things that are lacking here, and this is not what Taylor Swift does the best, and it does not achieve the heights of some of her other albums. And then the reviewer got doxxed and got death threats
my
for
God,
doing a positive but not positive enough review. And yeah, it's that, like, you can really like something, it might not necessarily be the best. You might personally think it's the best, but are not willing to brook critique, or if the assumption that if something gets criticism, that means that it is therefore bad and invalid, which is obviously not the case, because you can like whatever you want to like, and also even the best stuff is not beyond criticism. The Beatles wrote a lot of super dumb fucking songs, and
yeah,
even if they are sort of universally regarded as one of the best, rightly or wrongly, it's like, yeah, Rocky Raccoon still is stupid.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Popular versus favorite versus best.
Popular versus favorite versus best.
I think
Yeah.
I think popular versus favorite is just a matter of scale. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah,
Yeah, that, like, you have what is popular is the, well, actually, okay, I would say it's a difference of scale and degree, because on the one hand you can have something that is really popular and is liked by a lot of people but not
sure,
loved by people, whereas favorite, I think, implies you fucking love the thing. So yeah, you can have stuff that is your favorite, could be popular and the best, depending on if how all that stuff matches up.
yeah, definitely.
Like Blackpink, which is my favorite. They're clearly popular and they're also the best.
Obviously, like,
Obviously, I will brook no discussion. I'll dox you if you say anything different. God, yeah, I love K-pop. I cannot cannot handle K-pop fans. I guess, yeah, since since this whole episode has basically been framed by Killian, which is great.
Yeah.
Shouts. Thank you for that, Killian. If you ever want to be on the podcast, hit us up. I mean, we'd have let you on be on the podcast anyway because we're
Sure.
desperate for anyone to acknowledge us.
Yeah,
But
please.
especially now. But that middle part of, so we already talked about the like variety, and so variety getting into us conversing on like what are the genres that you like, what kinds of variety do you like, does it have to be variety within your genres or variety outside of genres, things that are
Yeah.
mixing stuff, that whole novelty aspect. We talked about rhythm, and rhythm talking about like what are the other craft elements of music that we gravitate towards, and that middle part of how what people like varies from culture to culture
Yeah.
is interesting. I think, I mean, on one hand, at a very fundamental basic level, it's like the major scale is more of a Western thing than it
Sure.
is like the foundations of what we consider Western music theory are different from the foundations of music theory in other cultures where other scale types are more dominant. And so what sounds like a happy poppy song in to Western ears might not be considered happy and poppy to other cultures. So there's that part.
I think there was something that was always interesting for me was like people's opinion in our high school of pop, not pop music, but like of Taylor Swift specifically in relation to pop music. And what I mean by
Interesting.
that is like I felt like there are some condescending opinions about pop music in general that were held by our peers that were not held like I felt like Lakeside had a pseudo obsession with Taylor Swift.
Mm,
Like if you
mm.
badmouth Taylor Swift at Lakeside, like you were what the fuck are you thinking? Like that's just wrong. Like that
God,
felt like the opinion.
that's so interesting that I don't remember that at all, which is insane given Taylor Swift is now my literal
Yeah.
favorite artist of all time. And I've been on a Taylor Swift podcast. Holy Swift Podcast, episode 64, Forever and Always with Andrew Whipple. Check it out.
Pretty good.
I don't remember that at all, but I 100% take your word for it.
Yeah.
Or rather, I do. I remember her being, because that was like peak popular Taylor of like that was the Fearless, Speak Now, and then Red came out like right after we graduated. But I associate it more with my freshman year of college
Sure.
of like Taylor Swift obsession being more of a freshman dorm thing than in college. But that's interesting. Yeah, that it doesn't surprise me that Lakeside overall would have elements of music snobbery, myself participatory in it. But yeah, that is interesting. That middle ground of yeah, who's the one?
Yeah, like
I guess.
looking down on pop music, but Tay Tay's fine.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
love her girl.
I wonder how much of that is. I wonder how much of that is that like she is a sort of. She was one of the pop stars that like had started off right before we got like her ascent timed with us going into high school, and it stayed
Sure.
through all of high school in a way that like
Justin Bieber though.
that's true. That's true.
Like that's my biggest comparison of
Yeah, no, it's
was
fair,
getting
totally fair
looked
point.
down by a lot of other people in our grade, and like
Yeah.
our peers,
Hmm.
and who like I mean, I'd put Justin Bieber on a similar level as Taylor Swift, like
I would. Well, I would put his 2015 album is incredibly good. His earlier stuff I think is good, but nowhere near as good as Taylor's earlier stuff. But yeah, interesting because I mean I fully was part of that of like, oh, Justin Bieber sucks. I mean,
yeah, me
it's
too.
yeah.
It was just a very very weird cultural phenomena within our high school specifically that I just wanted to bring
Okay.
up. But
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Weird.
but outside of that, culture and music.
Yeah. I mean, though that as a good microcosm of like, the
Specific culture.
of I think in the macro sense, there's the stuff of like what styles and things are valued in music. But even in micro, that like Lakeside example of like sometimes just weird tastes happen where it's like collectively the group says this is okay, this is not okay, or this is popular and this is not a popular, even if it's on seemingly arbitrary grounds. But like, yeah, the only difference between like I can't it's hard other than I do again think that those early Taylor Swift albums are now, in retrospect, better than
Sure.
Justin Bieber. It's hard to draw a clear distinction. Maybe outside of the fact that like Taylor was more country-y than Bieber was more
They were
poppy, but
more.
like, meh.
My impression is they were equally popular around the country,
Yeah.
but within our high school, like, no.
Yeah. Weird. I wish I remembered that so I had anything valuable
Yeah,
to contribute to that analysis.
unfortunate.
Unfortunately. But yeah, maybe it's because I'm less plugged into whatever Chicago's music scene is now, whether that's because overall music scenes or regional music scenes are starting to die out as the internet makes things more global and more individualized, or because I'm just not plugged into it because I, am not for whatever reason. But I did feel like in Seattle, especially, there were vibes of like what is Seattle music, even though
Yeah,
like I said, I didn't listen to a ton of hip hop, but like I could pick out what is sort of Seattle sounding hip hop in
sure.
early 2000s. And then going to college, different. It probably was more that like every college kind of sounded the same, but like there were kinds of music and kinds of styles that like felt like, yeah, this is the stuff that is popular on college campuses right now. I remember in particular that one flood, myself part of this, of like when the Front Bottoms was like every liberal arts college in the country. It was like all of a sudden everyone's super fucking into the Front Bottoms, but pouring out for 2013. But but yeah, I don't feel like there's as much of that now, but maybe it's that it is still happening. It's just not in scenes that I'm privy to.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I feel out of touch with, I guess, what the culture is pervasive on
Yeah.
in that way, Like, I have my own music that I listen to. I'm not, like, invested into the EDM scene, though, or the K-pop scene, or
Yeah.
a part of those communities. So it's hard for me to speak to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Same. Music. Maybe I'll just get old and only listen to Blackpink for the next 80 years.
Oh, no.
That's my plan. Anything else on what makes good music?
I don't think so.
Did we solve it?
We did. We're masters. 8 Up Club, answering questions 1 hour at a time.
You know it. You know it. Bare naked ladies. That's all it is. If you have opinions on what is the best music, and if you have opinions on what the best music is, and you think it's anything other than Blackpink, then don't email us. I don't want to hear it. But if you have opinions on what you think is the best Blackpink song, then you can email us at theawclub@gmail.com. That's theawclub@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, where my main Twitter is mostly me posting about Blackpink. I think I've only done it a couple times in the 8 Up Club one, but I should get back into that because that's a fun way to kill the time while we're in quarantine. That's at the AW Club. That's at THEAWCLUB. You can find our podcast wherever great podcasts are found and wherever so podcasts like ours are found, be that Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts. You can also go to our website, theadub.club. That's THEADUB.CLUB, where you can find our topics guide, where you can click on any sort of thing that interests you, and you'll find all the episodes that relate to that, or our starter guide if you want a place to start with the podcast after you've listened to this episode. Some of what we think are some of our best episodes to listen to. And you can, particularly if you like the Buffy episode, then tweet us and shame Alex Wade to keep watching Buffy so we can do another Buffy episode. And I believe that is everything.
Yeah. 8 Up Club out.
8 Up Club out. There's a new Neil Cicierega album that I don't think I've listened to, or I think I got to listen to an early draft of it 2 years ago at XOXO, but I have not listened to it since it's been released.
Neil what?
Ooh, yeah, okay.
Cicierega? That's a comedian.
Yes. Let me.
American comedian.
What?
I'm so confused.
Okay. Have you listened to? Oh no, Mouth Sounds is what it's called. Have you listened to Mouth Sounds?
Potter Puppet Pals. Okay.
Yes, Potter Puppet Pals, but also, where is it? Let me find it on SoundCloud. Give this a listen.